Hello and welcome to Tools in the Shed. It's a podcast powered by CarsGuide, ready to rip into car stuff that has caught our eye this week. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James, and with me is key contributor Chesto and
Hello.
Staff journalist Tom. This week, we're looking at a tough ute that could be the future of Aussie performance motoring. We'll give you our thoughts on some new entrants to the CarsGuide garage this week. And we'll catch up with a man who's been hacked, backed and slapped down in this week's MuskWatch. So stay with us. Now, first of all, we'll turn to some feedback that we had on last week's episode. And in it, our key point of discussion was around JDM cars that we'd like to see re-emerge, like the Mitsubishi Evo and a Celica or an RX Mazda or a 3000 GT Mitsubishi. And HSV Commodore said, I would love to see a new Lancer Evolution. That'd be great. At this point, I'd even be really excited about a new Lancer sedan. So he's keen to see something different from Mitsubishi. I thought that was a good one. But David Burt, or as I like to call him, Birdie, said, Tung mentioned the Lancer Evo, but whatever happened to Mitsubishi's glorious two-door, in quotes, sports car heritage? Remember the days when we had Starion, Scorpion and Cordia Turbo all in the marketplace? And I've got to say I do. And he reprised a TV commercial jingle, which, listen, Bertie, I have not been able to get this out of my head for the last 24 hours, so thank you very much. It's a classic piece of Aussie, the kind of Australiana, early 80s. We'll play a bit now of the TVC. So that is Laura Brannigan's work around Gloria being put to good use. Cordia, don't you know? Sportia. I cannot get that out of my head.
Now it's stuck in everyone's head, JC.
Exactly. So thank you. But Bertie followed up with, he said, any insight as to why so many Japanese sports cars from the 90s and earlier, had a power output of 276 brake horsepower? Legislation? Coincidence? Or a Japanese numeral feng shui? And actually what it was, I was there at the time, and it was what's been referred to in retrospect as the gentleman's agreement, which is where various Japanese brands got together and in the name of kind of a manufacturer nod to road safety, they didn't want a horsepower war to get out of control. So they agreed that everything would be limited to 276 horsepower, 206 kilowatts is what that equals. And so the R32 GTR, when it arrived, was rated at 276 brake horsepower. The speedometer in Japan, 180 kilometres an hour. In fact, cars are speed limited to 180 kilometres an hour. In Aussie, it was 260 kilometres an hour, the speedo in Australian R32s. Yeah. And strangely, the R33, which had an upgraded version of the same engine, the R34, they all made 276 horsepower as well.
I had a feeling it might have been one of those all created equal, but some are created more equal than others.
Absolutely. Funnily enough, the 3000 GT Mitsubishi was 276 horsepower. The V12 Toyota Century was 276 horsepower. But safety improved, and look, that whole charade ended in the early noughties, and that kind of went away. People weren't so fussed about it, but it's called the gentleman's agreement, and it was a thing there for a good long while.
The Japanese manufacturers tend to have quite a few of those. It's not limited to just that. There's a lot of sort of, you'll notice they might commingle things, and you can see the results of that with like Toyota 86 and stuff is not competing with each other but working together. It's really weird. It's this sort of art of competing but not really.
That was a great word, commingle. Did you say commingle?
Yes.
That's awesome.
I've never heard that. It's like you do with garbage. You know how you have recycling and commingled?
I'm pretty sure commingle is illegal at the moment in Australia.
Well, it was in the 50s.
Commingling, of course, is made much easier in Japan by the fact that Toyota owns pretty much everything, including a sizable portion of Subaru, sizable portion of Suzuki,
Daihatsu,
you name it.
You name it. Yeah, absolutely right. Jim Danick said, I find it ironic that we lament the return of JDM Classics and then talk about the BMW Z4 that lent many of its parts to the return of the Toyota Supra. And both cars are contract built by Magna Steyr in Austria. So he's absolutely right. I think that's a great point. Jack Robertson, love the show, guys. I'd love to see the Honda S2000 make a return.
Oh, the maker.
The F20C was a brilliant engine which had a red line which is sky high, super enjoyable, possible alternative to the ever successful MX-5 with some real power. And what a car it was, 2.2 litres. The rev ceiling was 8,000 RPM, rear-wheel drive, open-top car. I'm with him. I'd love to see a new version of the ST1000.
Pretty tail-happy too, if memory serves, JC.
It's a shame they don't have a factory-backed S660 here, because that's quite a cute little thing. And very rarely you see a few grey imported ones rolling around Sydney, at least. So I always love it when I see one.
Can I throw just one more piece in here on this JDM thing? I know we all lament the decline of JDM cars, and rightfully so, because they've vanished for so many years. But I'm firmly of the belief that we're on the precipice of a comeback of JDM. I mean, if you think about cars like the GR Yaris, the incoming GR Corolla, there's reports out of Japan that the new WRX STI, Civic Type R, Supra GRMN, some of those will have almost 300 kilowatts of power. I mean, we are on the dawn of a new era of performance in Japan, I think.
Yeah, I think Toyota is in the driving seat to a large degree in that Akio at the helm of the company has said we're going to make more exciting cars. So that seems to have been a catalyst that stirred the market to action on that kind of thing.
Sadly, though, I think just tying it back to the beginning of the conversation with Mitsubishi's positioning right now, as part of their Renault-Nissan Alliance whole deal, they've been positioned as sort of this SUV and commercial manufacturer rather than anyone who's going to put out a sports car anytime soon.
Mate, to be honest, even Nissan's in that boat. I've said this before, I know, but I think if Nissan didn't have the finishing touches almost complete on that 400Z, we probably wouldn't see another.
We'll see it.
There's every chance that this will be the last one.
It's a beautiful segue, Tom, because Yamal Kumarasiri said, hi, guys, would Nissan let Mitsubishi build a new Evo or a 3000 GT when Nissan already has the GTR, new Z car, and they only just got across the line by the skin of their teeth? Also, could the Celica share parts with the WRX? It's not a rebadged, if not a rebadged WRX. There would be mutiny from the fans if that was the case. And I imagine he's pretty right.
But there are rumours to that effect, JC, that in much the same way that the Yaris, the GR Yaris is supposed to feed some as yet unknown Subaru product, that the WRX, the base level WRX, may very well feed another Toyota product, which, you'd have to say had a fair chance of being a Celica.
Yeah, I think as well, there's a chance, however slim, that they could do a badge engineering kind of deal and put a Mitsubishi badge on a 400Z. Who knows?
I don't know. Yeah. Well, yeah, I never thought people would buy the Fiat Fremont, but they have.
But you make a good point, though, JC. Take the badge heritage out of the 400Z or the 370Z or whatever it might be. Yeah. And you lose something there, don't you? If you just stuck if you stuck a Mitsubishi badge on it and called it something new, I'm not sure it'd fly.
I don't think so either. But, I mean, DeCook, our old mate DeCook, says, thanks for bringing back the memories from his virtual racing diary.
Yeah,
so all those cars are very much in his sim racing history. Would love to see the new Celica, but if Toyota's so much on fire, how will they cope with the production of all these legends while also spitting out Suzuki siblings of the RAV4? And, of course, he's referring to the Suzuki Across, which is a mildly revised version of the RAV4 sold under Suzuki branding. And it's to your point, Chesto, that Toyota has its fingers in all of these different automotive brand pies around the place. He's probably 100%. Right. They've got a lot of plate spinning.
This is probably another conversation for another time, but I think we are fast-forwarding to a future in which Toyota is pretty much the only manufacturer on the planet. Because if you look at cars like the Yaris Cross, the Corolla Cross, then the RAV4 and onwards and upwards, new Land Cruiser coming, they are going to be so strong in every single segment in the next 2 or 3 years. It'll just be incredible.
Yeah, it's true.
I got to say that Corolla Cross looks like it was made to have a Suzuki badge on the front of it as well.
Oh, I like it. Are you not a fan of the design? I think it looks pretty cool.
Oh, I could take it or leave it.
I think it
But
looks
mostly
like a bit of an angry bulldog. It's got that kind of full face looking at you, a bit kind of aggressive, gnarly-looking face to it. I don't know. I'm not an immediate fan of that one.
Well, give it time. Give it time.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. You've got to give it time.
Mate,
Now,
like fungi, it'll grow on you. Don't worry.
Lofty Visions, a name we can all aspire to, says that he loves the show. Thank you very much, Lofty. Ask us if we know whether the LDV T60 is still getting a V6 diesel. And that was chat earlier this year. We ran a story theorising that by about now, such an engine could indeed be arriving. The same V6 that's used by Jeep and some others, a VM Motori sourced unit. But our latest mail is no, that's not going to happen. And primarily, the theory being that it would make the vehicle too expensive, that you would have a car that would be up in the 46, 47K range. And for a brand like LDV, that wouldn't be sustainable. So our latest news is that that's not a thing. That's not a happening thing at this point.
Yeah, bit of mixed reports there, I think. We had really solid mail on the ground in Australia that it was happening, but LDV is certainly a long way from confirming it. But remember, there is another LDV coming, one that's been teased now. And in fact, you'll find that story on carsguide.com.au, the LDV T70. So who knows what power plant that will get, but I imagine you won't see it in a T60 anytime soon.
I think it was an Australian person who shall remain unnamed saying, you can expect a T60 with more cylinders, and whether they were actually speaking out of school and whether that was based on any actual facts, it would seem that was more aspirational than real. Yeah.
Exactly. Or just one of those, expect the unexpected. Could be anything.
Now, the other one we touched on was the Ineos Grenadier, a pretty close to most people's eyes reimagining of the outgoing Land Rover Defender. And Muhammad Jassim says the Grenadier looks fun and functional. However, having a BMW engine is a recipe for disaster. His words, not mine. Thanks, guys. Best podcast. Keep them coming. So thank you very much, Mohammed. And Hammer Rocks finishes us off with saying, I'm no intellectual property rights lawyer, but isn't Ineos breaking or infringing on any copyright laws with its Grenadier? The Ineos Grenadier can't be mistaken for anything but a Land Rover Defender. Reminds me of the Chinese car maker Zhangling Motorland Wind X7, a copycat of the Range Rover Evoque, which Land Rover sued for and won. Or do copyrights only apply for current models? It's a really good question. I think there would be some residual benefit that would flow to Land Rover in that shape of Defender, and they would have every right to have a go at Ineos if they wanted to. But like Hammer, I'm no copyright lawyer. We could get some feedback from people in our audience if they are. But I do remember writing a caption for a certain Aussie motor magazine when that Landwind was a prospect for coming to Australia, but it failed its safety tests. And I do remember the caption, "Wind won't pass." Was the one that I was very proud. I was very proud to apply to that photograph. So it never made it to Australia, but it was a brazen copy of the Evoque, that's for sure.
Two very quick things. We've done a lot of stories on the Chinese knockoffs, and there are some absolute corkers out there. But to my knowledge, that Landwind is the only one that was successfully prosecuted.
Yes.
And in fact, it was temporarily removed from sale, from memory.
Yeah.
But anyway, if anyone's bored, in fact, we might even be able to pop up a photo for you. Google the Mahindra Thar, Thar, which is an absolute dead ringer for the Jeep Wrangler. Always has been. And that's been an ongoing court battle for years.
Right.
And part of the reason they won't sell that vehicle here in Australia.
Okay. Does it, Chesto, have the 7 bars in the grille and all of those kind of signature elements of the Jeep, or have they gone?
It does.
Okay.
Except they've got 6. I've just counted them.
6. Okay. Well, that's
I have a feeling though.
No, I take it back. They've got 7. Sorry, poor counting on my behalf.
Yeah.
There'd be more than just copyright issues behind that one. I think it's not the safest vehicle you might find.
No, I think they were intending it to be a farm vehicle, like a not to be road registered, essentially. But mate, the resemblance is uncanny, shall we say?
I see. All right. Well, thank you for all that feedback. It's always very much appreciated. We're going to move on to our main topic of discussion. Chesto, I'll ask you to take the lead because you were the author of a story during the week that put a very enticing prospect of a performance Navara, but not in an off-road sense, in a slightly different way. It opens up a whole discussion around where utes might go.
Yeah, so we were talking to Nissan Australian boss Stephen Lester about life in general, but mostly focused on the Navara. Where to from here? We know that a new Navara, of course, was teased at the end of Nissan's financial reporting YouTube video, same place that they teased the 400Z and other cars. So we know that a new one's coming, or at least a facelifted one is coming, which led us to the question of sort of where to from here. We know they've got the Warrior in Australia, which is that kind of off-road focused vehicle that they've that sort of has been at least partly manufactured here in Australia in terms of suspension, ride and handling, etc. But it does leave a hole in the market in Nissan's point of view for a road-focused performance ute.
Yes.
And actually, when I was talking to him, he called out the old utes from Commodore and Ford, those kind of low-riding, V8 powered sort of performance utes that had no chance of ever going anywhere near a gravel patch or up a muddy hill. They were purely road-focused vehicles. So his argument was there is a whole segment of the community that's currently uncatered for, and that's who he would like to talk to with a new Nissan Navara badged V8 powered ute.
Yes, and it would be a Nismo, or it could well be.
It could well be a Nismo. Now, I should preface this by saying this is what Nissan Australia is asking for. They've got their hand up. They have flown to Japan. They're flying back to Japan to talk to them about producing this kind of vehicle for them. But as it stands right now, there, of course, is no plan in place to actually build the thing. But the most fascinating point for me was that what happened to all those people? What happened to those people who were buying Maloos and those kind of things? How are they being serviced now with Ranger Raptors?
Yes. Well, it's a bit like where do you turn your gaze when what you wanted is just no longer available? And if you want to buy a new vehicle, I remember someone talking about, everybody wore flares in the 70s. Yeah, that's because they were the only pants you could buy. There wasn't any other type. So if you wanted straight leg pants, sorry, you're out of luck. So if you want a V8, brand new V8 ute that's for road use, pretty short supply at the moment. So it is a niche that looks to be, open for the filling, as it were.
I think there's an element of that, isn't there? It's just that, it's not a vehicle of the times. We've moved on from there, and it's sort of like sedans, the people who might once have bought a Maloo now just buy a 4x4 diesel dual cab, maybe,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've watched, we've got some young blokes in the street where I live, and he's got his friends. They've all got roughly 10-year-old dual cab utes with the big bull bar, the lights. They've even got the radio masts, the sports bar at the back. One fella's got the RM Williams Longhorn kind of sticker on the back. This is in the suburbs of Sydney. These cars,
they're not a big red.
They do not go out to big sky country, let me tell you.
No.
So I suppose it's just trying to acquire a certain image, but it's like 90 degrees over this way. It's a different kind of macho-ness,
And to further to what Tom said, I think it goes to prove the point that the people who were buying those cars, the Maloos and your SSV red lines, etc., weren't buying them necessarily because of their straight line performance. They were buying them because of the image that those cars gave them.
Sure.
And so when that image shifted to cars like the Ranger Raptor, which really fundamentally, apart from the tray on the back, couldn't be more different from a Maloo, really, in terms of the way they drive, the capabilities, the way they steer. But when those cars became the cool cars, I guess the focus just shifted to there. That image just shifted to a different make,
Yes. And I mean, I know you theorised in the story, Chesto, that Nissan has a V8 that they could drop in the Navara. It's already in the Patrol.
Do they ever?
So it's not beyond the bounds of reason that this could happen. If you play with the Lego components, to make the thing happen. And Nismo would be just the right kind of vehicle, pardon the pun, for that kind of development to go through.
What are we imagining here? Like low rider, rear wheel drive, bit of a fat body kit on it.
Yeah, well, he actually used the term, all those people who used to hoon them up. So, but look, you know what? From my perspective, when Ram said they were going to bring out the 1500, there was no market for that car. Really, there was fundamentally no space in Australia for a jumbo truck. Now it seems to be the only spaces where everyone's trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Same with this. As it stands right now, there is no official market for a V8 powered street focused performance ute. But that's not to say you can't create one. Build it and they will come, JC.
That's so true. I mean, your investigations over time around all the brands that have been looking over their shoulder at Ram and going, oh God, that's a relatively small part of the market, but gee, it must be profitable. It'd be great to have a chunk of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
With your Nissan Titans, your Ford F-150s, your Chevy Silverados, on it goes. People are chipping away at it, but no one's really found a way to embrace it in a higher volume way and kind of give Ram some competition.
Yeah, I think poor old Distance sort of had a rough one on this now that the Titans confirmed to be not coming and all the rest of it.
Yes.
Well,
but I think
not coming in right-hand drive from factory. That's what we know so far. but then neither does the Ram either. So that doesn't entirely rule it out. But I would suggest it's looking less likely than it was a few months ago. But be that as it may, I would say. I would not be shocked if in the next few months Ford confirmed right-hand drive production of the F-150.
For that. Well, that Rouge plant where the F-150 is produced in the States, it's Ford's oldest, and it is an impressive beast that is able to fine-tune goodness knows how many different variants and trim levels and whatever, and you would think once it's engineered, being able to just dial right-hand drive into that equation wouldn't be a massive Everest to climb. It would be a little mound in the road, to get on top of.
I agree. And can we all just, speaking of right-hand drive and left-hand drive, can we just have a brief moment's silence for the Bronco? Gee, it looks cool, that car. I can't believe Ford's not making a plate of it.
Yeah, no, that's a problem. So,
and I stand by my comments that I've made that the Bronco Sport is basically just a Freelander 3.
Wow. All right. Can you just put the lid back on that can of worms, or just let them kind of wriggle all over the floor? But I think if Nissan, in short, was able to do a, socially distanced diplomatic mission to continue that pitch, they would own it. They would have first mover advantage, and I think it would be pretty massive. And you'd be drawing people from the off-road lift kit, image conscious off-roaders, as well as your former Maloo and Falcon V8 kind of ute buyers, and you would really have something there. If they could do it, it would be a massive one.
Arguably, JC, you'd be dragging old Commodore and Falcon sedan V8 buyers too into that market, right?
Yeah,
why not? It's we've seen the way that utes have sort of and SUVs for that matter, but have kind of replaced sedans as family cars. But if you had a nice V8 powered petrol ute that was purely for road use and not much for off-roading, I don't know. I actually think there would be a queue for it.
Well, it'd be good to know what our viewers and listeners think, whether they're in a ute currently, whether they're pondering a ute as their next purchase. What's driving that? Do they actually need it as a work truck, or do they want it for some other reason? It'd be great to get your feedback. But for now, we will move to our own garage and the cars that the three of us have been driving in the week just gone by. And Tom, I want to kick it off with you. You've been in a Japanese car, one that has a bit of a cult following. Tell us what you've made of it.
Yeah, so I was in the Jimny Auto. They only sell it in two specs in Australia. You got the manual and the auto, so it's not really that hard to figure that out. Yep. But I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Because it has this iconic look, and they've committed to it so much. But I think my angle into the review is going to be, is it sort of nostalgic and committing to this purpose to a fault? Because it is an urban review, so it's more like, how does it compare when you drive it around town?
Yes.
And there are a whole bunch of weird little things about it. So all the switchgear on the inside is the same as a Swift, which I had a couple of weeks ago, which is kind of funny. You got a Swift steering wheel and a Swift aircon unit that's just sort of been, shoehorned into the dash and stuff, which is, in one way it's kind of cool, and another way it kind of doesn't work. I think it could use kind of like its own sort of steering wheel and that sort of thing. But there are some weird things that There are some weird things about it though. There's no telescopic adjust for the steering. There's not much adjustability for the seats. There is no boot, or there is a boot if you get rid of the rear seats.
Sure.
The materials in that boot area as well are kind of weird and scratchy and plastic. So if you put anything there, it just sort of slides around when you drive. And because it's on that sort of ladder base, it does kind of really tilt in the corners. It's if you're spending, whatever it is, $27,000 in that segment, you can get a much better car for the street, as it were. And go ahead, Chester.
I'm raising my hand here. So only because you mentioned it was an urban review. Now, that car won World Urban Car of the Year upon its debut, which to me absolutely boggles the mind. I know I always sound like a Jimny hater here, but I think it's cool, it's funky, it's unique, it's great to look at on the road, but my God, it's awful in the city. It is. It simply is. It's a car that really isn't built for the suburbs. The fact that it won Urban Car of the Year blows my mind. And I'll tell you another thing. I reckon there would be a fair percentage of people who rushed out to buy a Jimny when the hype was all around it that might be looking at it now thinking, oh, God, what have I done?
My takeaway from it is it's like, my takeaway was it's like an MX-5. It's a lifestyle car, and it's really a second vehicle. It's not something you'd have as your primary vehicle milling around the streets of Sydney, for example. I mean, and when it comes to its urban practicality, you can kind of park it everywhere because it's tiny. But then you've got this weird issue where the power steering is almost non-existent if you're moving slowly. It's so weird. It's like it's really light at high speed, but then you go and turn it into a parking spot, and it's like going to the gym. It's wild.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they've had to engineer genuine off-road ability into that vehicle. So if you're going to tip the scales such that that's achieved, you will pay a penalty elsewhere. So I take your point, Chesto. People may have dived in, that's so cute, got to have one, it's small, it'll be great, I'll drive it day to day. And that compromise is leaning so far in terms of its off-road performance. Yes, it may be wearing thin on people by this point.
And mate, if you're in the back seat driving over rough roads in the city, it's like you are the mole in a game of whack-a-mole, like constantly.
Yeah. I've got to say the one particular point is the automatic transmission as well, because we've tested a lot in manual, and we've talked about how good it is in a manual and all the rest of it, but the auto it's so rudimentary, and it really is something like from the early 90s, late 80s or something. It's got an overdrive button which you have to press. When I picked the car up, the overdrive was off and I didn't realize. So the moment I went on the expressway, it's just making a racket and doing about 4,500 RPM, and I'm going 80. And I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I realized the overdrive was off, and I went,
that's a real throwback. That is a real throwback and overdrive.
Again, I'm not trying to hammer the Jimny here, because I do think it's cool. It certainly serves a purpose, and it does the most important thing, which is makes the road we drive on more interesting. It's not just another beige SUV, but just the thought of it as an urban car. I don't think that's what it was designed for, but it's what people have adopted it to. We're trying to force it into this urban role, where I just really, as you rightly point out, Tom, there are more urban options out there, incling from Suzuki.
Well, the irony. I was going to say the irony is when it's in Japan, everything's urban. Like it's been made by a Japanese company. There's precious little opportunity to do much off-roading in Japan.
That's right.
Just really quickly, the last thing on that car, even though it sounds like I've kind of slammed it, I love driving it every single day. So subjectively, it's awesome.
Okay, fantastic.
See if you can get it for 12 months, and we'll come back to this conversation in a year.
Chester, we'll move to yourself, South Korea this time, and it's a Kia. Tell us about it.
It is. Now, I am in the Kia Seltos Sport Plus, which comes in a variety of sort of configurations. Mine is the two-wheel drive, front-wheel drive CVT 2-litre gearbox. Look, I won't bore you with the way that it drives. We've done lots of reviews on it. Suffice to say, it drives really well. It's not the CVT actually isn't all that intrusive. It's not until you really put your foot down that you even notice really that it is one. That's when when it's really
that's
working,
an achievement
really
for sure.
Start to notice that it's doing its CVT thing. But the thing that blows me away around this car is I picked it up at the same time I picked up several other vehicles in that price bracket, and the Seltos for me was the one that exuded that sense of sort of quality and, dare I say, premiumness. There is that. I know it sounds super cliche, but there is that like satisfying thud when you shut the rear door. It doesn't feel like you're folding cardboard. It feels like you're actually shutting something of quality and value. I think the dash layout's wonderful. The aircon controls are all digitalized. The screen on the top can be, the infotainment screen, which is a word I hate, can be split into 2 or 3, so you can have nav and music or whatever you want. The way it pairs with your phone, obviously Apple CarPlay or Android Auto is displayed beautifully on the screen. The steering is nice and heavy, but there's still some feedback there. It just feels like a quality vehicle that's been produced really well. I got to say, I'm sold on the Seltos. I was when I drove it at the international launch in Korea, and I'm equally sold here in Australia.
Wow, that is a ringing endorsement.
And I'm not alone. Kia telling me that they sincerely that because mostly the Kias come out of one factory in South Korea and gets sent all over the world. So the only reason really that the Seltos isn't higher on the sales charts is because they can't get any more. They have sold every single one they've got, which is kind of a ringing endorsement from the consumer too, you'd have to say.
Yes.
Sorry, Tom, go ahead. Yeah, I got to say that I haven't driven the Seltos yet. It's one of the few cars in that bracket that I haven't driven. But the difference between the GT line and the base model in terms of the way it looks is quite hilarious. Like there's a big gap there in terms of you go from these massive wheels and really cool LED headlights, and then you get to the base model and it's got these tiny little steel wheels with plastic hubcaps and sort of dorky halogens and stuff. It is quite funny, the model tiers, the difference between them.
Mate, agreed. And I'll tell you what, I'm just looking at it now. The price jumps from $26,690 for the entry level up to $42,690 for the highest model. So you're not,
that's a lot for a
you're not getting much change from $20,000 between those two trims you referred to, Tom. So the Sport Plus, I think, is a fairly happy medium. It's $33,690 in the version that I've got. If you want the smarter 1.6 litre turbo engine and all-wheel drive, it'll cost you $37,190. Now, it has to be said that isn't chump change. So if you're spending, the better part of $40,000 and getting a car that doesn't feel like it was produced with quality and sort of a sense of premiumness, then you're probably shopping in the wrong brand.
You'd be disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Seltos to me sounds like some kind of condiment, whether it should be, in the spice rack or an antacid kind of tablet.
I agree.
I think I need to take a Seltos. I've overdone it at dinner or something like that.
Yeah, put a bit of a ground Seltos in your stew,
Right, this sounds awful, and I have made this joke before, but the first thing that came to my mind was a cream for some sort of rash on your unmentionables. You'd have to go to the pharmacist and say, look, just quietly, I need a tube of Seltos.
Moving on. I'll finish off the trio with Hyundai Venue Active is the car that I've been driving this week. And Chesto, I know you had it as a long-termer very recently. And Tom, I handed the vehicle over to you. So for the last couple of days, you've been in it as well, and you'll have it for the next week or so. So the Active is just under $24,000 Australian dollars before you put it on the road. It's one up from the base. So the Go is the base model. So it's one rung up the ladder. 1.6 litre Atmo petrol engine and a 6-speed auto in this car. A towering 90 kilowatts. And 151 Newton meters of torque. We'll get to the talk a bit later. In my plus column, I had the fact that it's fitted with AEB, that it's quiet. I found it surprisingly quiet. You talked about quality. The way in which it's actually pieced together and the way it's finished off, particularly around the cabin, I thought was pretty impressive for an under $25,000 car. It's spacious. The rear headroom, the nature of the design means that you've just got heaps of room in the back.
Yeah,
I had enough leg room and plenty of headroom. The audio, I think it's a 6-speaker audio. It's a pretty good audio system, and it has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And they've been quite canny. Tom, you picked it. They've got a partially leather trimmed wheel, so the touch point, there is quite nice day to day when you get in and use the car. In the minus column, I had the fact that it is, in fact, sluggish. The non-turbo nature of the engine, that torque, it's only 150-odd Newton meters, and the peak is 4850 RPM. You're nearly at 5,000 RPM to get to the peak torque number. So you're really urging it along the whole time to get going. It's not very comfy, despite Hyundai's legendary local tuning. That torsion beam rear suspension means it's fairly bouncy. I don't find it a particularly comfortable car. Despite the quality aspects, all the plastics inside the car as hard as a rock. My elbow was sore just from resting it on this piece of marble in the door without any padding on it. The lane keeping assist is there. Great that it's there in that car, but it's super aggressive. So you find yourself just going towards a bend and, oh, shit, it's just about pulled the wheel out of your hand.
I turned it off pretty early, and I must admit.
And things like no one touch on the driver's window, you kind of come to expect that. It's just a little bit of solder on a circuit board. Couldn't you just, make that happen for this car? It seems just a little bit on the cheap side. But overall, at a $24,000 odd car, I think the impression I was left with, it was quite quiet and nicely put together, but just those plastics inside the car made it feel pretty cheap. It wasn't a good look or feel for mine.
JC, for mine, I found, tell me if you agree with this, I thought the cabin was nice and quiet in the city, but it does tend to lose a bit of that charm when you take it on it's a city car, let's be honest, but just the way that gearbox tries to squeeze power out of that tiny engine on a freeway means it's always sort of changing between gears, and that does sort of break the cabin ambience a little bit on the freeway. But one of the things I liked about it, I must admit, was to me, it felt a little bit like the Toyota CHR, in that, yes, the suspension tuning might not be its most comfortable, but it felt, for mine, it felt surprisingly sorted on the right bit of road. It didn't feel like it felt like it was verging towards being something approaching a driver's car, just without the engine to back it up. Like, to me, it drove around corners far better than A, I expected it to, and B, that it probably needs to for a car in that bracket. So,
all right. Well, that's good.
That's good. For that, I'd give Hyundai's ride and handling guys a rap, probably, because I imagine it there behind that part of it.
Okay. Well, I wasn't putting it into that environment. I just found it around the bumps and thumps that you inevitably find in the suburbs and the city to be a little more jarring than you'd like them to be.
Yeah. And also no proximity unlock. That for me, I've said this before. I know it's a cheap car, but man, that kills me. Still kills me approaching with shopping or whatever and digging around for a key to try and open to try and unlock the door. Proximity unlock's a deal breaker for me now. I've decided.
I quite like the look of the thing. I like how it's got that big face, and it's like this kind of little car with this kind of big heart. It's trying to be this big brave thing with this massive look, and it's got these tiny little alloy wheels that are hilarious. I just love the whole
tiny
package.
Wheels, little 15s, and just to show how subjective all that is, Tom, my significant other walked towards the car and went, "Oh well, that's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?" so not a fan there. So
mate, I had a similar reaction
different opinions.
Chesto, don't worry.
Okay. It's funny because I talked to a friend of mine, and I quite liked it when it came out, and I like it now that I've had a chance to drive it and everything. And a friend of mine went and test drove one, and he said, "Oh, I just didn't like it." And I thought, how can we have such differing opinions on this? But there you go. It turns out it's a divisive car.
It's the way it goes.
Can I raise one more point before we move off this topic? And it is about the Venue, but in fact, it's about all cheap cars, and that is just how much programs like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto have revolutionized the cheap car experience. Back, you remember this, JC, I'm sure you do as well, Tom. Back in the day, you used to have to spend a fortune for a half-decent stereo. If you wanted navigation, that could be $2,000 or $2,500, and it was always ordinary. It never worked. Now you can buy the cheapest car in a brand stable, plug your phone in, and have access to maps, podcasts, Spotify.
Well,
that to me has totally revolutionized the cheap car space.
Well, my recollection is that 2010 sat-nav was pretty exotic. That was a big inclusion. So only a decade ago, that was a big deal, and now it's like cost of entry.
And you can bang a little screen in there for cheapest chips, and away you go.
Yeah, absolutely. It shows how spoiled we are. And how quickly we come to assume a new base level and then have a whinge about things that aren't above it. Now, speaking of having a whinge, it's time for MuskWatch. So first of all, the dear leader has been hacked. His Twitter account has been hacked, and I've noticed over time there have been very close accounts. It's used his hero picture from Twitter and it's said Elon Musk, but the actual handle will be slightly different. And it's people trying to encourage you into a cryptocurrency kind of scheme or whatever. But this time was absolutely his account. And he his account said, "I'm feeling generous because of COVID-19. I'll double any Bitcoin payment sent to my Bitcoin address. Good luck and stay safe out there." And then listed a Bitcoin address, right? And this happened to the likes of Joe Biden and Bill Gates, Barack Obama, Apple, Uber, Jeff Bezos, Kanye West, Mike Bloomberg. This was a pretty big scam, and they'd found a way inside these people's Twitter accounts. And public blockchain records show that it raked in about $100,000 from these different kind of accounts that had been hacked. Enough people went, "That's a good deal," and sent $1,000 worth of Bitcoin for them to get $100,000. But anyway, all things back to normal. And when his Twitter account had come back online and to normalcy, such as it is, Elon tweeted a beautiful render of the upcoming Gigafactory in Berlin. And viewers on YouTube will be able to see it. It is quite magnificent. If it ends up being anything like that, it'll be spectacular. But then Guav Suave came back with a comment and had a picture of the building site as it is right now, because the thing's in construction, saying reality, deforestation and destroying environment at its best. So had a big dig at the person who's saving the planet by creating this enormous factory. Jens Esbol said, "That building on the side, is that the Hulk's room?" Which I thought was pretty good. And Schloster said, "Where does the tent go?" Making reference, of course, to some production foibles at Fremont, where the wedding marquee went up next to the main factory. So it's a great point. Where will the wedding marquee go? But then, sticking with Germany as a theme, Tesla Autopilot has been deemed deceptive to consumers in Germany. Yeah. So it's a conversation we and others have had ad nauseum about whether or not that term is deliberately misleading about what it might deliver. So Germany's become the first country to ban Tesla's Autopilot and full self-driving labels, with both viewed as misleadingly prohibited and providing false promises to customers. So now in Germany, henceforth, it will be called Auto Drive rather than Autopilot. Variation on a theme.
Even that's too close.
It
so
is.
Just for the record, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, the very definition of the term autopilot is a device that keeps aircraft, spacecraft, and ships moving in a particular direction without human involvement. So that is not that. Unfortunately, that's. I guess there's an argument that is what.
See, the thing is, you had a person on Twitter called Whole Mars Catalog saying, "Ever noticed how planes have autopilot, but they still have two human pilots?" So he's making the point that autopilot has never been the thing that people perceive it to be, that it's a tool. However, we're talking about reality versus perception.
That's right.
And the perception in the broader populace is that autopilot is your hands-off level 5 autonomy. Yep. Where Tesla is right now is about high level 2, lane keep and your active cruise and those things to keep you on track, and a little bit more. So high level 2. So to set that expectation, full self-driving, that's pretty clear. So Germany has finally said, "No, time out on that. We're not going to let you get away with it."
But JC, there is a reason. Put it this way: there is a reason that almost every other car company on the planet calls it an assist and not an autopilot. I.e., it's supposed to assist your driving, not replace it. Tesla was the only one who went out on that limb.
I thought the topper was when the dear leader came in on the back of Whole Mars Catalog's comment and said, "Yeah, Tesla Autopilot was literally named after the term used in aviation. Also, what about Autobahn?" Like, auto in Autobahn is not referring to an automatic hands-off road. It's actually referring to a car. So I thought that was just staggering. On the face of it, that is a really silly comment. But anyway, what's not silly is the share price. This share price climb is seemingly never ending. It's at more than $1,500 a share now, $1,546.01. And it was $1,365 last week. Now, on Monday, it was at $1,764. So it's actually come off its high from the week. And it's interesting, I found two stories, both from the same outlet, Markets Insider, and you had one that was referencing Piper Sandler, which is an investment bank in the US, and they're predicting another 55% jump to $2,322 in the relatively near term because of first mover advantage. They see Tesla as still being the leader in the EV space, and software potential, so where they can go with self-driving and autonomy and all of that stuff. And that's a sentiment that is around right across the kind of stock market in the US.
JC,
they're seeing that as a big deal.
I agree with those 2 points. They are still a market leader, I think, in both EV and software. But what kind of annoys me a little bit about the stock market, I must admit, maybe it's just because I'm poor, is that often when people say, "Oh, we predict this will go to $2,100 a share," often it goes to $2,100 a share because of that prediction.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, the 2,100. So of course it goes up naturally as people jump on board.
Yes.
Which is the same reason why when Elon himself said we're overpriced, it went. Doo.
You bet. It's so true. And on the same site, you had a piece crediting comments from Bob Lutz, who many of our listeners will know is a long-time kind of automotive industry veteran, really. He's been at Ford and Chrysler and GM in super senior positions in each of those companies. And he's kind of pointing that the emperor's wearing no clothes, as a lot of people are saying. How can this company that produces 300,000 cars a year be the most valuable in the world by its market capitalization? He says, quote, "The fact that Tesla is worth more than Fiat, Chrysler, General Motors and Ford combined is worth more than Volkswagen and Toyota has nothing to do with reality." And he's right, of course. Tesla stocks exploded over 250% since the start of 2020. So anyone that was around for the 90s, tech bubble, it has echoes of that for me, that there are people jumping in because this is just a stairway to financial heaven. And everybody's kind of on the edge of their seat, like, is this real? Is this the start of something new and different, or is this going to go bang and blow up in people's faces?
Mate, it reeks of Bitcoin to me. When everyone jumped on the Bitcoin bandwagon.
The only thing is, the thing about the tech bubble was that it was based on pretty much nothing. There would be ideas that seemed like this is going to go in a big way, and people would pile in and invest, and there was nothing actually there. Tesla is producing cars, producing batteries, producing power systems, roofing tiles, all of those things. There are some fundamentals, but what a guy like Lutz is saying is, you're building barely any cars, and yet you're the most valuable car company in the world.
Yeah.
How on earth can this add up? It just doesn't. The potential isn't that great.
And mate, I know it always feels like we're death riding Tesla, and I promise that we're not. But like most car companies at the moment, they are not often profitable either. It's not as though they're making money hand over fist. The reality is most car companies aren't at the moment, and Tesla's one of them. I think you can count the profitable quarters on one hand, really, since their inception.
And I think it's a bit late to still continue to call them a startup. They're an established company now, so you get that startup bleeding cash. You have to invest. I reckon they're at a point now, like 15 years down the track, where that's probably not the language you need to use to talk about the Tesla as a car maker.
At some point, you demand a return, don't you? So, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens there.
I think there are two elements to this. It's one of them is that Tesla has a real advantage, like talking on the software side, that they've collected so much data, and that's actually really valuable. So I think there's some inherent value in the data they've collected in the way that we're heading with things like Autopilot and battery technology. Sure. But then there's this whole thing of like, they don't have the infrastructure really to support the car industry. Everything is take and not give. You see how many cars around the world use Volkswagen parts, how many cars around the world use Ford parts, how many cars around the world use Toyota parts, and you don't really see cars around the world using Tesla parts, do you?
No. That's true. But anyway, it is fascinating to sit on the sidelines and watch that roller coaster ride. But
one thing is absolutely certain. I do regret not buying shares at the beginning of 2020.
I know. Look, with that, we have reached the finish line. I want to say thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chesto.
Thank you, JC.
And thanks to our Director of Light Bulb Moments, bride kidnapping expert and professional sleeper, Mr. Pritchard. A technical tour de force, as always. Thank you, Matt. Today, he's in a T-shirt saying, And the Lord said unto John, Come forth and receive eternal life. But John came fifth and won a toaster. He's also wearing medieval jester pants and faux fur lace-up Oxfords, which is an amazing ensemble. Please pass on the word about the podcast and let us know your thoughts by searching for CarsGuide on Facebook and Instagram using the hashtag CGPodcast, or email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, please rate and review us. And remember, you can watch us on YouTube. But before we go, overheard old Uncle Arthur speaking to Auntie Elsie this week, saying, what's all this about speeding drivers racking up points? If anything, we should be punishing them.
What are your best, JC? Oh, goodness.
Thanks, Uncle Arthur.